Hello, everyone, and welcome to another virtual domain-driven design meetup. Um, Today, I have Christina with me as our co-host, and we'll have Lorraine talking about an introduction to system thinking. And I'm very happy because I've met her multiple years at conferences. So I'm very happy that she's here all the way from South Africa to present her introduction. So I'm very curious. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you.
And well, you can start sharing your video and let's go.
Right, did it share?
Yes, it works.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Really great to be here. I'm sorry about the weird time post the working day, but well, it's evening for me. I don't know if it is for everybody else. And I am from Cape Town, and I do come often to Europe to see you all at DDD Europe. So just wonderful to be back. Now, let me see if I can get the focus of this thing. So we are just doing an introduction, right? It'll be a whistle-stop tour through what is systems thinking. And at the end, if you put some questions in the chat, then my co-hosts will feed me some stuff for us to talk about. I've put my X and Mastodon handle and LinkedIn if anyone wants to connect up with me later. We'll repeat them. So, systems thinking is a discipline for seeing wholes. I don't want to read my slides, but it's such a lovely quote from Peter Senge. And it's about the patterns of change. All of these parts of this quote are so important in systems thinking. And then the interconnectedness. So an awful lot of the people I work with are developers. We're in IT. We are detail-oriented people. With systems thinking, we're asking ourselves to think bigger, to actually step back and look at the big picture. And often that is the hardest thing to do. And it's weird because kids get it. Kids are really good at big picture thinking, but we get taught to decompose. We get taught to think smaller and smaller. And eventually we actually lose the ability to really do the stuff that's necessary for systems thinking. So the parts of the system, everybody finds the elements. There's three parts that I'm going to talk about: elements, connectedness, and purpose. Elements are easy. That's our decomposing thingy. We all get it. We're good at it. Connections, a little harder to see things. A lot of the material and systems thinking takes examples from nature. So if you think of the tree, there's water travels up, through the trunk. That's the flows. Without the flow, nothing changes in the elements. But the really important one is the purpose. And I'm going to come back to that a couple of times, but the purpose of a system is not its stated purpose. To actually understand purpose in systems thinking terms, you actually have to look at what it does, not what it says it does. So let's talk about that briefly. The example I like is, what is the purpose of a school? Now, you'd think it is to educate our youth, to handle the world. But certainly in South Africa, a lot of our schools are cram machines to get you through exams. So, we subvert purpose. And you have to actually look at how has it been designed, because the way we've designed it then is actually just to push people through exams. So the purpose is always what it actually does, not what it states. A very important element of systems thinking. Remember, this is the whistle-stop introduction, so I'm going to just keep going here. The feedback loops are really critical elements in the whole systems thinking, because we have to get feedback in some way. The system intrinsically has feedback loops inside of it. And there are different types of loops. We'll deal with that now. Reinforcing and balancing. So, well, let's do my examples. Balancing loop. I have a picture of balance, but the easy thing to think about is when you're cold, you put on a jersey, your system's back in balance. So you have some trigger, something happens, some equal thing happens, and the system goes back to balance. You could also talk about a system tends back to a stable state. And most systems want to be in a stable state. But there are times, of course, when they are not, and they behave in sort of runaway ways, which is the reinforcing loop. So I use the stampede as my image for this because when a system starts to reinforce, it often gathers speed. And it will come to a rest. They can't run forever. Most systems run out too. You may have something that's gone viral, but it doesn't go viral forever. It will run out of speed. There will be a tailing off. So let's look at some examples for this. There is something called a causal loop diagram, which I haven't really drawn properly, but just to give you the simplest one. You are hungry, you add food, that will drive down hunger. So there's one side has got a plus, the other side has a minus, an opposite reaction, and you put a big B in the middle of it to say it's a balancing loop. It's a very basic little diagram that's often used in systems thinking. The reinforcing one, nice example is you put money into an interest-bearing account, so it gains interest. The interest goes back into the account, making the account more, which means you get more interest. So it's reinforcing, not ever as fast as we'd like, but it is reinforcing. The bad ones can be the negative. Negative reinforcing is also a thing. So we have fishing fleets that go out into the oceans. If they overfish, the fish population reduces, and then the less fish there are, the less fish will be born, the less fish there will be, and the more we still keep on fishing, the worse it gets. So it's very, very horrible to get a reinforcing loop. I'd like to bring this back to human behavior, like in our teams. If you have a team which is unhappy about something, that unhappiness seems to spread much faster than happiness spreads. So in human behavior, negative reinforcing loops often seem to have a little more impetus than positive loops, with being careful of. And the last main thing you really need to know before we dive into some more details would be to think about the boundaries. Systems thinking can be very much like a jersey with a loose thread, and you pull and you keep pulling. You have to decide what is the scope that you can consider, because everything is connected. If we are looking at a team that's not happy, or we're looking at some systems behavior that we want to intervene in, where do you draw your boundaries? Because external factors probably influencing them as well. Maybe some of the teams have got problems at home, in a work environment that's outside of your boundary that you can draw. Or maybe, may not be, maybe. But that boundary is a decision, and it's very important to define scope. The example is that there are boundaries and boundaries and boundaries, right? So each part of a human system, from the skeleton to the nerves and arteries and whatever, they're all systems, and they all make up a bigger system. So depending on your specialization, you draw your boundary tighter or further apart. How does this relate to usually people in the software field? We are dealing increasingly with bigger problems at more scale. And they're wicked problems, right? They're complicated things to solve. Almost every major hurdle that lies in our future is a socio-technical problem. In other words, us techies are probably going to be called on to help in some aspect of the solution. And if we can't think beyond, what we're doing, we do harm. Okay, we're going to do things that we shouldn't do. And I'm not mentioning AI particularly. But everything is interconnected, and it's an accelerating pace of change. Cool. I have another quote for you. The more complicated the system becomes, the more we tend to take wild stabs in the dark at changing things. It's too difficult to model. So the examples are things like housing problems and citywide things, and commuter problems. And people think, well, this is the solution. And we all fall in love with our solutions. And we don't model it. And the harder it gets, almost the less we want to model it because we feel it's beyond us. But the more we actually need to try. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the systems thinking techniques that would help you to model things. Because ultimately, that's where we should be able to go to test our hypotheses. The diagramming technique that I really like is called stocks and flows. So I'll lay it out for you, and then we'll look at an example. Stocks, that's the easy bit, the nouns. Okay, that's the things. Only thing is, it can be not as tangible. Happiness could be a stock. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a thing you can actually put in a box and feel. It's just anything of value that you can talk about as a stock. And in terms of these diagrams, it needs to be measurable. So we can look at the traffic patterns. We could, be looking at commuters. We can measure them. We can see how many cars are using our roads, right? And it will be averages or moving averages. And even happiness, if we really had to, if we were trying to model something, or we were trying to figure out how to make something better, we could do surveys at least. It might not be an absolutely believable number, but we could try and do better than no number at all. That's the main thing. Then there are flows, and nothing can change without a flow. So the stock itself can't change unless something flows into it or out of it. Okay, that seems, I think, fairly obvious. So we can't have more population until this is, births, deaths, things that change those numbers, usage rates, whatever it is. And again, that is measurable. Anything about flows is they're measured by time. So you would talk about something per year, a daily rainfall. I need to read it for you. So a stock needs a flow to change. There's 4 things we're talking about. Feedback loops will be part of our diagram. We absolutely need to see what is changing and how we react to it. So that's something we have to do in this modeling. Again, just you have the balancing kind or stabilizing, and you have the reinforcing, also sometimes called an amplifying loop. This is one of the things that's quite different from the first little model that I talked about, those causal loops. In stocks and flow diagrams, you would recognize that the stock itself influences the loop. So you need money to make money. The more stock you have, the more it might affect something. Cool. And then, just to make life a little bit more complicated, there are variables that affect the flows. So a variable on the flow might be if we're looking at animals being reintroduced into the wilds, and there are various variables, birth rates, there's also hunting permits issued, and there's all sorts of things we'd have to consider. So, right, variables. So what does that look like? Okay, this is one of my general little stock and flow diagram. The stocks are squares, right? And they're easy, they're with the measurable things. So I'll explain the workflow. It's called a procrastination workflow. This theoretically is how I operate, and it's not that far from the truth. It says that when I've got a lot of open tasks and I have schedule pressure, okay, so remaining time and schedule pressure being 2 variables, my productivity goes up and changes my completion rate. Okay. And therefore more tasks get closed. So let's put some variables, let's put some values in and see what that looks like. Would you want to put up your hand if you want me to go slower on this diagram? Anybody putting up their hand? It's a bit of a rough diagram, but I mean, it's partly intended to be slightly funny. But we are...
I don't see anyone raising their hands, so... I think you're doing quite
Okay,
okay, Lorraine.
right here. Then let's. Oh, I want to tell you one more thing. There's a little cloud on the left side here. The cloud is our boundary. The cloud says behind this, we don't care. Okay, so how tasks get in here is not part of the problem space. Problem space is how I deal with, closing tasks, right? So that's the way you diagram this. And these little diagrams on the flow lines, you think about it as a tap. That is your flow rate that you can increase or decrease in some way. And that is the magic of what we're looking for, is we're looking for how if we want more of a behavior, what is the tap that we can apply? How do we leverage it? How do we have more of it? Okay, so these diagrams are really useful. But first, let's just talk about actually adding the measurements to that diagram. Whatever you're measuring, and kind of try and keep it standard, because if you're talking 1 minute about tasks and the next about hours, can't do sums. Okay. Your stock usually has an initial value, and then it changes via the flow rate after that. And you can actually model the stuff with tools. You can try out some of the modeling tools. I do apologize in the sense that some of those I've mentioned, if you're really interested, you could go and dig into them. I think that I'm actually hoping they're more. I don't generally do the modeling side, but I like the idea that you can plot, like what could happen if I increased this flow, what could happen. And that's the point of this, is to have a tool for making better decisions. So back to this one. Let's say I started off with 40 open tasks. We don't care how they got there. That was in the cloud and nothing closed. And, it's a long time to go. So I'm getting through one task a day. That's it. I'm not pushing myself. I'm just doing enough to convince my boss that, I'm actually working. That's the rate. However, as we approach the deadline, maybe my rate increases. So I'm doing 2 tasks, 3 tasks, so maybe 1, 3, 5, 7. So by the deadline, I'm like really motoring to get through that stuff. I'm probably pulling late hours because, hey, that's how the last minute works for all of us. But that would be how you would diagram it. So you would have some flow rate, you'd have something per day, and then you would plot it over time, depending on its curve. And even if you have to guess some of the figures, you have to average them. If you're doing more ephemeral things like happiness rates and things, taking a stab at it is a lot better than simply interfering in complex human systems. Because we're not doing this for stuff we understand. We would be doing this for things we don't. And, if we are doing things at the socio-technical solution level of big, wicked problems, we should at least take a stab at trying to understand what might happen. So why do I say a couple more things on stocks before I dive off that? So some stuff, we can measure happiness. It is sort of a stock, but it's like one of the ones where I'm stretching it the most because it's quite hard to store. You can a little bit. I mean, if you've been nice to somebody they'll maybe forgive you once or twice to not be nice, but it's less storable than most. And you have to think about what creates it and what depletes it if you want to talk about it as a stock. Another one, which is a stock, which is an interesting one, would be knowledge. We do gain knowledge, but how do we lose knowledge? Old age, changing technology, it makes it redundant. It becomes quite interesting when you think about how you lose knowledge as well as how you gain it. I thought, on the basis that a lot of us are in IT, I thought it might be worth asking you whether you can imagine code as a stock. I mean, I think we can store it. I'm pretty sure that's what I keep checking into my GitHub. It has value, definitely has value to the business. But that's interesting. What kind of value? When does it not have value? What has value? The lines of code? The knowledge that it represents? What if we can't modify it anymore? How valuable is it then? Has it started to lose its value once we can no longer modify it? Cool. So just for the sake of it, and because this is one of my favorite little rants as a side to systems thinking, is when you're trying to think about human systems, and you think about things like teams, which are very relevant in our working lives, and we change a team member. We're changing Joe and bringing in Sally. Do we have the same team? I mean, we've just lost a whole bunch of knowledge at the very least. It cannot have been adequately passed on. So I'd like to suggest that teams are in fact immutable. And that if you change a team member, you change the team. So the maze image is that if you think about your code base as a kind of maze where the first generation, people who developed the code, they knew their paths. They knew how to get from one end to the other. They knew where to find things. But the time you bring in like the next generation could mean a month later. I mean, I know sometimes teams change quite fast, but whatever it is, not the original code, people who wrote the code, they might have to hack through the hedge in places to get to what they want done, or they start ruining the design because unless that knowledge is passed on. So anyway, we just need to treat our teams as much more valuable than I think we do. And think about the maze as your code base as knowledge, the architecture. So systems thinking says that we only see some of the system. There's a whole lot more underneath it. Generally, assumptions, belief systems that are driving things we're not aware of. So we're making decisions, but we're not aware of all our unconscious biases and the just general assumptions we're making about our world. And that, I suppose, is that is the entire reason why we ought to have diversity in teams, so that we actually consider more perspectives. I think the famous one was the Apple Watch, I think it was, that came out and didn't work on skin tones with high melanin. I said it right. So, we really don't always think about everything that lies beneath. The other thing that's interesting in systems thinking, I've talked about big picture, but it's not only big picture, it's also small. Sometimes you need to get the details right. You're going to have to go and get some figures to actually figure out flows. And if you want to take it all the way to modeling, you're going to be thinking about, how do I measure this? And you're going to get quite small. So it's telescope, to microscope. Okay, I've actually rushed through this quite fast. There are a whole bunch of systems archetypes. It's generally referred to in the systems thinking world. And an archetype is kind of the pattern thinking for systems thinkers. So there's the one I've got up for you is the policy resistance, which is this weird behavior that systems somehow seem to push back. You think you're making a good change, and sometimes it even feels good in the short term. So you've made a decision, you've changed your team around, you've restructured, and it looks good. And everybody walks away at that point, patting themselves in the back. But funnily enough, the system reverts almost back to its old pattern after a little bit of time. It seems to push back against that change. Some of that is human nature too. We push back against change quite a lot. But the worst of it is we make decisions that we think will solve the problem, but in fact make it worse. So one of the examples I have for you is a lot of this is caused by the fact that we are too used to things which are short term. We do X, we get the Y as a result, and we're done. And it's not like that. You have to think about what Y triggers over time, okay, because it's going to change state. You might be able to change state now, but it's going to want to go back to stable. What is that new stable going to be? It's not going to be the same as before your change. It's going to be at some new stable position, but that may be better or worse than you wanted, right? And the commuter problem, where some cities decided build bigger highways, right? Allow people to get in and out faster. Well, there's a quote which says building more lanes to solve congestion is a little bit like loosening your belt to solve obesity. What happened was people they moved out to the suburbs, but now there were more people commuting. So initially that really looked like a bad idea. It looked like a terrible idea. But in fact, humans are not that stupid. And it took a little bit of time, but the jobs moved out to the suburbs too. And then some people still commuted lots, but some people now didn't commute. And the average, if you just looked at it over more years, was that the congestion was pretty much the same as before the highways had been built. It didn't get worse, at least long term. It got worse initially with more people living far away and more people commuting. But that's the trickiness of these wicked problems, is the trickiness of the solutions we're trying to come up with. Oh, and I'm sure, Eric, you would love the quote from John Steyn. All models are wrong, reflections on becoming a systems scientist. Very much part of what we say at DDD. Systems thinking asks us to think about what is possible rather than what is wrong. What do I mean by this? Think about the printing press was the picture. We're no longer trying to solve how to make a better printing press because, hell, we found digital. Okay, so systems thinking is not solving yesterday's problems. It's actually trying to come up with new things for tomorrow. Do we make more problems? Yes, we absolutely do. And that's why I keep talking about modeling and trying to be a little more conscious of the decisions we make when we think, let's just change everything. But we're looking to find new ways of doing things. And we're looking for the leverage points to increase flows. So my productivity going up, the leverage point was apparently you have to apply more pressure. Okay, closer I get to a deadline, that was a leverage point. How might that play out? If you're doing an agile team and you've got 2-week sprints, how many people have heard their team saying, oh, the pressure in those last few days? It's just something we hear in the industry. So what's happening is people are actually procrastinating, potentially. They're not slicing it enough so that there's a level of continuous. And then there's this rush for the end again. It's a procrastination workflow. It might not be as silly and, as the one I've made up for myself, but it is actually trying to model something real that does happen, that we leave things. So, and we built the system like that. We built sprints to put the pressure on the end. So remember, the system does exactly what it's designed to do. We didn't mean it to do that. But if that's what it's doing, then that is what we have built it to do. Cool. Which means we can change it. And continuous deployment is one of the ways we change it. I want to show you one more little thing. A lot of this material, where I first encountered systems thinking was the lovely Donella Meadows book, Thinking in Systems. But she's also got some amazing work about how you envision this better world. Hopefully the things we're coming up with when we decide about this app that's going to make you get an Uber faster or all these words that are new to us, these things that came in the last decade or so. When you're thinking about these, you're creating a new world, right? You're moving goalposts. How do you do it? It's one thing to talk about it. There's only a few brilliant people who get to do this. Can we all do it? So Donella Meadows says this is the formula. First, she actually, there's a wonderful little video. I might even have a link for you I could get. But you close your eyes, literally, and you try and imagine this better world. Whatever it is, whatever your problem space is. if it's your working environment, you try and imagine what would make you excited to walk into your office, your spot where your desk is, whatever it is, in the morning. What would that look like? What would the people you encounter say? So she's very much about envisioning, imagining. You should have no constraints. Do not place yourself in constraints which say, oh, that's impossible. I couldn't get that. I mean, her example was, solving world hunger. And it's almost like we're like, no, we can't solve it, right? We could do small things. No, go the whole way. Think of the big picture. Then step 2 is to research what's possible. With so many more options on the table that you haven't already told yourself, no, can't do it. You research what is possible. And then with reality as a base for both where you want to go and what is your possible steps to get there, of course, act. Such a simple little formula. I just really like it because I feel like sometimes some of us need the rungs laid out for us to say how we would do this. That comes straight from Donella Meadows. So, saying it again, systems always behave exactly as they are designed, just not as they're intended. These are real trees in Cape Town, blown into those shapes by the wind. It just seems to me to sum up the wind will do what the wind will do, and we all need to adapt. So that's it. I am open for us to discuss. If there are questions.
Yes, so let me put away
I'm just going to give you one more before you stop the share. Let me just quickly then put up the references if anybody wishes to just grab some of them. I know people often ask what can they read, just to preempt that one. Okay, if you needed a screen grab, now you can take it off.
So let me remove your spotlight. And now for anyone who has some questions, I'm not sure, Christina, if there are some questions in the chat. If you don't want to be on the YouTube stream, so don't put your camera open. If you want, you can pop your camera open now. You can unmute yourself. And I already see some clapping. So thanks, Lorraine, for that great introduction. So anyone have any questions, you can raise your hands or just speak up.
Thank you, Lorraine. We have one question. We have 2 questions, actually. The last one is related to your last slide. Can we get this deck?
Yes. I don't know if you have a place you would like it put. I mean, I could send it to Kenny, or do you have a slideshow?
Just in the chat. You just put it in the chat and then it's
then I've got to upload it somewhere. I'll have to do that first.
Yes, and then you could upload it at some point and share it on Meetup. We can share it as a comment.
I think that works. So it was a case of doing the last tweaks to the slide deck, probably minutes before the session. So it's not pre-uploaded.
So your procrastination workflow worked.
I think this particular one was just busy life, but sure.
And then we had another question from Eric, but I'm sure that we need some more explanations for that. Do you want to... Oh, we have a lot of hands. So the question from Eric was, I don't know if he's still here. If
we can go, Eric, I still see Eric. I'm not sure if you still want to ask it, Eric.
Yeah.
What was that?
If purpose can be seen as fitness functions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the way you described the purpose of a system sounded a lot like a fitness function. You were saying this basically, it is whatever it does, but I think kind of, then the examples you gave were like schools teaching to the test, but that's a result of setting up consequences so people adapt to that, right? If you didn't have teachers' salaries tied to the tests or whatever it is that they do, then you'd have different behavior.
Yes. So we have actually designed it, even if we didn't think we had, to get exactly the behavior we got. maybe, Eric, I should also add that the different parts of a system actually have different purposes. So you continue with the educational thing, one could say, you know, that a university is there to produce graduates, but the accounts department is there to collect fees, which is often exactly at odds. Well, this is in countries like us where we have to pay for our tertiary. I think some places have sort of figured out now we'd rather have educated people, because the accounts departments used to work against the student. The accounts department is going to throw you out if you haven't paid your fees. And so we have and that's how companies run as well. You've got to remember that you can have these wonderful vision statements for the company, but actually every department ends up following whatever it is that is giving them value, which, as you say, might be how their salaries are set up to reward them, or whatever it is, or what they perceive as their part in the journey. And getting everybody to pull in the same direction and to serve the same purpose turns out to be very difficult. Shall we pick, if that's okay? That answered someone. Hans, would you like to go, or who's next?
Yes, I would like to go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So in the end of your slideshow, you showed slides about creating new systems, but I would think that most of us, me included, are maybe stuck in some systems already that we don't enjoy too much. And do you have any, I don't know, pointers or tips, or how to change already existing systems, or how to get people to, you know, join in finding new solutions?
Sometimes the word systems also throws us all a bit, because, you know, we tend to think of software systems, and some stuff can be that, but often that's quite far down the line for me if our social systems aren't right. So if I could draw a parallel again to team or company, because I'm going to keep this in a work context as much as I can, but we're told we need to, you know, produce, and we're involved in maybe some development, could be, as you say, existing software. And yet the systems broader than that work against us. So you might have a very corporate meeting culture. You can never get any work done. And there's a lot of social systems that are often preventing us doing our best job. So you know, I'm throwing the word system around because it covers all sorts of different things in our heads. But when you're working with existing systems, figuring out the scope of what you can influence, and then getting everybody on board to the purpose that it should be, and then acting to enable that purpose. And if it's not working, be careful about it appears to be working short term. We've made the changes to our team. Management promised they wouldn't interfere anymore. They would trust the agile process, that stop asking for Gantt charts or whatever it is. And then in a couple of months, it's all gone back to the old, because we as humans often like to see an immediate reaction, and systems thinking says we've got to look at the longer sustainable picture on it all. So I'm not really sure if I've answered your question, but how does that help towards the...
Yes, I completely understand that most answers would be a type of it depends, but yes, thank you for your ideas.
Yeah, I mean, we are in the Goldilocks profession, between software.
Yes, definitely.
Just enough of everything.
Right, next question.
Hey, hi, Steyn. Yes. Actually, I am from India. Like, I thought like I was expecting a different, conversation altogether in this call. But yeah, it was very nice, and I just want to know like two things basically: how design thinking is different from systems thinking. That is one thing, and you have given a decent, I mean, like few examples, right? Like basically, what was the outcome that we are expecting as part of the systems thinking into our daily life? Like, uh,
Okay.
yeah, and how can we achieve that? Like, what are the bare minimum steps to start with? Like,
So I have a question for you also. Sort of what were you expecting under systems thinking? But maybe you can leave that for now and tell us later. How to start? So if I can leave everybody with one big message, is that systems often feel intractable. They feel like they have a life of their own. You can feel quite powerless in the system, and even if you're trying to do good, it doesn't seem to be paying off, whatever it is. The moment you realize the system is doing what it was designed to do, I mean, I actually think that's empowering, because then we could just redesign it. Just horrible word. But it is actually empowering. It is in our hands. If anyone's ever read the book Systemantics, which kind of says, everything that can go wrong will go wrong, and, those kind of pessimistic views of it. I actually don't have a pessimistic view of systems at all. I actually love the sense that, well, I can see things are going wrong. So what have we designed into it that we shouldn't, or that we could change? And that for me is a day one thing. I see systems thinking opportunities around me all of the time now, because I'm sort of aware. So instead of being trapped inside it going, oh, why is this happening to me? It's like, oh, okay, I get it, this is how I've set it up to be. And that's very empowering. I think you had a question right at the beginning, but I've lost track of that one.
If I can add, in Donella, her book, with the archetypes you talked about, I think there's nice examples of nudges that in the end, there's the nudges, but also per archetypes, he gives some general nudges. And if you know that something is happening, if you're in that archetype, she gives you some nudges that can already help you move it forward as a beginning. I really like those heuristics he gave there in the book. So, and the book is not it's not a thick book. It's not, I think it's a nice,
very readable.
Yeah.
There's she also talks a lot about resilience, which I didn't put into this. But for instance, an archetype would be it's something about the intervener, and the idea being, that if you have, I'll put again in software terms, but somebody who rushes in to solve everything, the one guy in the team who can do everything, what you create is less resilience amongst everyone else. You want to design your system for resilience, where there's other people who can pick it up, whatever it is, the task is, what the process is. And so there's a lot of considering resilience in systems thinking when you get into the detail of it as well. But yeah, they come out of the archetypes, which give us quick patterns to go, oh, I see that. I see we're busy doing an intervener pattern here, which is dysfunctional.
I think the only chance is to become resilient because of all the wickedness, because of all the speed. Surprises were earlier sometimes. Now we can have surprises every hour. So it is, the world is not, it didn't become, I don't know, more complex or something, but we know about more. That's the problem. Now it's everything transparent. So we have to be resilient. I caught myself quoting Postel's law every week. Be resilient, be nice with others, and manage your stuff internally strictly. But this resilience for the unexpected, I think this is the way to go.
Unless you think about it, you don't design it in. It's almost like I don't know why we still think that plans are simple. I don't know why we still come up with simple plans for things. I mean, I love the quote around, planning is essential, but plans are pretty close to useless. Because a plan is often too rigid, but the planning helped to build in resilience, because at least we were all on the same page. Getting back to that, all models are wrong thing. Really.
And that's the plan.
That's the plan.
This is my talk about. So stop planning rigidly. That's the plan for resilience, plan for change, for that. The rest will be much easier.
Paolo.
Yeah, the plan that are useless because they all change immediately make me think about when just before a battle, Napoleon was asked by his lieutenants, "So what's the plan?" And he said, "Well, we attack and then we see." Yes, of course, there's a lot of things you can do to prepare, but resilience and, yeah, in this case, victory at the end, but that's not necessarily a war, maybe a win-win situation. The resilience is in being able to capture the feedbacks in the system
Right.
and react,
So,
aiming for the result.
which is why finding out where you can measure, where you can actually see what your feedback loops are, is critical. And often we're not aware of the feedback loops, and they're always there, right? There's almost nothing in the world that potentially doesn't have a feedback loop. It's one of the questions, I think, in Donello's books, is to try and think of something with no feedback loop. And she says that eventually, in a very big group, the best everyone could come up with, which a really horrible one, is the only thing without a feedback loop is death. That ends it. But almost everything we do, from all our actions, all our natural systems have feedback loops. Everything we build is feedback loops that either work correctly, it isn't, that everything has feedback loops. You just got to go find them. So are those all the questions?
We have one in the chat, I think, Christina.
Yeah, from Vasily, but he left and now he's back. So now I can ask it. You answered it halfway. So I feel the systems thinking approach is better done together with others, but how do you even start to get others abroad?
You communicate. So if someone else want to answer that, feel free. I mean, I thought Kenny, you were about to say something there. That's fine. I'll do my best.
No, he was back, but well, how to do that together is I like to do guerrilla modeling. So just open up and start visualizing, right? That's very effective. Just, oh, this is interesting what you talk about. So don't talk about, that's the classic thing in, don't talk about Fight Club, don't talk about doing DDD, don't talk about doing event storming, just do it without talking and
without naming. Yeah,
it's not always that hard. It's not always that easy, I know, but just do it for yourself and expose the model. That's Donella what says, right? Expose your model to the outside world. So just do it for yourself and then expose it to others and let them critique it.
There's I'll go to Eric in a second. An awful lot of stuff does work like that. You change yourself and then you change the next person. So you want to be have more diversity in your team. So you make space at the table and you include people, and then the rest of the team sees that behavior and they do it, and at various scales, and depending on who you are, you can have more and more influence. But yeah, you always start with yourself. Just do it. Eric, I give you the floor.
Well, my question isn't related to those things, but in your presentation, you showed us a diagram that had the flows and the accumulations, and I guess I feel a kind of unease about those kind of diagrams because they convey a sense of understanding of the system that maybe applies to some systems. I mean, I understand that if I have a bathtub and I run water into it and I'm letting water drain out of it, and I could measure how much is going in and out. And if I really get picky, I could add evaporation, and I could probably get quite close to predicting how full the bathtub would be. But if I'm trying to predict, I don't know, how a team is, how productive a team is, or what would increase the productivity of a team or whatever, I guess I'm having a hard time with diagrams like that seem to convey, like, have you found that, to be a practical tool? How do you use those diagrams in practice? When you talk about these systems that have a lot of unknowns, and, I know diagrams like that can be used with physical systems or well understood systems, but I guess I just want to hear you talk about that. I don't expect to have a precise answer.
I was going to quickly just, before we go to those really complicated systems, I just wanted to show another one of the diagrams. I have so many different versions of, but there's a stock and flow diagram. It comes pretty much out of Daniela's book about ordering things and how delays, where when we think there's going to be more sales, so we start increasing, but in fact the sales may have already tailed off by the time it gets to production, and by the time the factory's getting it out, maybe the demand's dropped. So there's these perception delays, and those sort of things can be modeled because they cause these kind of fluctuations. So some things model very well, and it's really probably worth doing it, because otherwise we do bad systems, and some things model very poorly, and human behavior is one of those.
I think you've answered my question.
I'd like to just put one last point on it, because just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't try and get more information before we make decisions on what to do. I think that was the point, is that the harder it gets, the more we just say, well, we don't know, we'll just try. And I'm not averse to just try. I jump off cliffs myself, that's fine. But is it our only response? Could we not have said, well, how could we find out more? Could we have talked to more people, got more buy-in, actually listened to more users perhaps, or all of those good things, which I think we all know we should do and often don't. But anyway, the more
I fully
vague it is, it's harder.
Yeah, no, what you say makes sense. I really do like this distinction, though, between the types of systems that model well and those that are, more resistant to modeling, because I think otherwise people march down paths where they use these tools,
Yes,
these overly precise tools, I might say, and it causes harm. It makes it harder to manage a system, or harder to improve a system, when you somehow convince yourself that you understand it better than you really do, or whatever. I don't know, but I do like it in terms of like all that inventory stuff with the time delays. That's quite cool.
Talking about, that's almost, you've got to bring all these things in, and that's going back to the iceberg, because we all convince ourselves that our favorite solution is the best one. So it's just a sort of a request to step back from that, and see what are our hidden assumptions and our cultural values and anything else that might be below the surface of the decisions we're making, and ego and all sorts of dysfunctional things that unpack in there.
I also see a lot of people just want to, if it's so exact, they want to exactly create it as an outcome, while the conversation, with all the modeling tools, the conversation is actually the value of it usually, right? The insights the conversation gave when you use the modeling tool, instead of fully making it exact the way it is. You know what I'm getting at? So I recently did an example mapping, which is a quite simple tool, but people wanted to go into, okay, this is the rule and those are the examples. And then I say, well, but this is also an example. Yeah, but that doesn't fit the rule. I said, yeah, great, right? No, but it doesn't fit the rule. So they wanted to use the tool as it's portrayed, right? As the way they think it's intended, as to describe the scenarios of the rule, and not as a way of thinking together.
And we're challenging ourselves all the time, to think outside the box again, to it depends, there isn't a one rule. Is this a good candidate for this?
Yeah.
Is there something hidden? Should we be microscope or telescoping it? No,
Do we
I
have a
have,
question?
I have no answers for any of you here. I'm giving you thinking tools,
Yeah.
not thoughts.
Well, there's someone with a question on YouTube, and it's sorry for the naive question. How can we or should we separate compared system thinking and logical thinking?
So logical thinking might be deconstructive, right? I mean, it's not perhaps the only way to approach logic, but it often is that we're taught to deconstruct the problem, break it down. And systems thinking is specifically asking you to consider impact, flows of information, stocks of things, different levels. And it's logic almost implies it's a little bit like a chess game. I could solve it all in my head. Where systems thinking is saying, no, you need to go and get some facts. So try and find out how much of this is there really, and how much of that flows. And so I think that might be a differentiator if I've understood what you mean by logical thinking correctly.
Yeah, this was the, let's see, there's a delay in the feedback loop. We can model that out with YouTube and what we're talking about. So hopefully the person will chat back. And someone also mentioned something about mindfulness, which is also for me a bit ambiguous, but
appreciate it.
Yeah. Also the difference between mindfulness and system thinking, but I'm not sure that was all that person chatted about. So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that or tools.
No.
I
was busy saying bye to Eric as well. No, I didn't quite get the intent. Sorry if you want to explain again.
Yeah, me neither. I'm not sure. Okay. We need some more context for that. So hopefully they will bring that soon.
Well, I hope it's been an intro. I hope people can start from here and go and read some of the books. But as I say, it's very encouraging to think that systems are not these weird things that you're at the mercy of. I think that was the message for me.
And thank you for that. I think it was a great intro.
Oh, thanks. I think nobody has any questions anymore.
So I've either completely confused everybody or it was really clear. I'm not too sure about that conclusion.
Yeah, so I'm very curious if people now can start doing work with the system, right? As you say. I hope it's at least for me it was a good introduction. One person said about the logical thinking they agree with your points, so that's great. And I think that's a nice wrap up. And I hope people will nudge this or will nudge them to change their system. So thank you, Lorraine, for joining our meetup, and hopefully see you in the future. We'll be back in 3 weeks, where we have Hibri will be talking. We just published it on Meetup, and he will be talking about decoding paradoxes. Why are many good ideas in software delivery counter, and this is very hard for me to pronounce, intuitive? That
you did very well.
Did very well.
There's just certain words that frustrate me because in Dutch the tonation is different. So intuitive is such a word. So but it went well. So hopefully in 3 weeks, see you there. It's just published. I shared the link in the chats. And thank you again, Lorraine. I will close the stream. We can hang out in the Zoom chat here. But thank you everyone for coming.